Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Welcome, everybody, to Building My Legacy podcast today. I have with us Julie Beckerman. I'm really delighted to have her with us because she brings a perspective that I think many of us wake up one day and begin to think about and take a look at. But before I get into explaining why she's here, let me tell you a little bit about who she is. Julie is a certified professional coach from the Institute of Professional Excellence in Coaching and a certified career development counselor from New York University. She studied industrial organizational psychology at Teachers College at Columbia University and has experience in a number of areas and fields within psychology. Julie helps people learn to navigate and redefine their relationships through the divorce and co-parenting process that she has experienced herself and has developed a process with, specializing in unhooking from codependency in individuals with high conflict personalities. One of the things that she talks about is divorce isn't easy, rebuilding isn't easy. And I think many of us, as we go about building our careers, developing our leadership spheres and our influence, we're so busy, we're so challenged, so overwhelmed sometimes. We wake up one day and we go, what happened to these relationships? And we begin an assessment process that is a journey. And I thought that Julie's insights might be very helpful to some of you who may be asking those very questions today. So Julie, if you would just share with us your experience, what brought you to where you came, so our audience gets to know a little bit about you and who you are.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you again for having me on the show and for having the opportunity to talk about something in this space. So, it really does affect everybody and relationships and our families, right? That's tends to be central for people. So when they're not working or not supporting us, it can be really, really challenging. So for me, I started, my journey started what I would say was about 10 years ago a little over 10 years ago when my younger brother died. And that sort of kicked off for me a process of starting to reevaluate, what mattered in my life. I was working full time at the time. I worked on Wall Street, so I was, all involved in there, and I had a little daughter as well. And following that, things got very challenging for me as well. I had some trouble with addiction and drugs and an eating disorder, and I was going through all of those things, which also led me, fortunately or unfortunately, coming through that and sort of out of it to reevaluate myself and my life and what it was all for. I had worked really hard to get through a lot of things, as many people do, right? We invest a lot of ourselves, and then it's like, well, what do I have now? And what do I want to do with all that? And so that was really, for me, the process. And I was, making a lot of changes in myself and then looking around at my relationships and seeing, like, where was I going to go from here? And that was really difficult to do. And so I ended up, with my husband at the time, we were trying, and it just was, again, in that evaluation of, like, this isn't working. This isn't really serving me. This isn't the kind of mom I want to be. This isn't the kind of person I want to be. And that was a difficult decision to come to, and things sort of led from there. And then I was, going through the divorce process, and things change again. I was in my mid-30s, and now I'm, kind of starting over, trying to, again, reestablish a new relationship with a co-parent and a now ex, helping my daughter and my family go through that new change, and then rebuilding my own life and my own career. And so that was sort of what led me to merge the two together, and how I came to this point of doing what I'm doing now, and a little bit of my story. So
when you started developing that new relationship with your ex and looking at co-parenting, for you, what was the structure? What were some of the things that you looked at? What were questions, things that helped you, questions you wished you might have asked that would have helped you get through that process perhaps better, or structures that you found that really helped you navigate it?
So one of the biggest things that I think serves anybody in any situation through any transition was identifying judgment. And so through that process, anytime you're going through some sort of change and you're about to, upheave something, there's always thoughts about it and ideas and opinions and what are people maybe going to think, or right, other people's judgments, our own judgments, and our own judgments and other people's judgments are always going to be there and can always create a block and a reason to not move forward. And so being able to recognize, okay, I'm bringing some kind of judgment around what's going to happen to my daughter, right? Divorce is bad for the kids, or, we don't want to put our kids through that. And that's a judgment, right? That's a belief. Like, how do you know it's not going to be better for them? Like, what does that mean, putting kids through something? No, it's just what life is, and we're always going through it. So really learning to identify like some of those blocks in my thinking that weren't serving anything. They were just beliefs. I didn't even really know where they came from. And one of the reasons it's so powerful, I think, for example, when you're also going through divorce or co-parenting and there's conflict, right? There's a lot of words being exchanged, and it can be very impactful. It's a really emotional process, and understanding what's coming through as a judgment versus what's fact is something that I think is extraordinarily helpful and continues to help me through every relationship I have.
So
that helps you, yeah.
Yeah, is there a process that you go through that helps you differentiate judgment from fact?
Yeah, so I think that it starts with judgment words, right? And picking up, so it's not necessarily identifying all the judgment words that are out there, but what we do is we look at the situations that are causing some kind of trigger or distress in us that aren't working. And then by unpacking those moments, we see where judgment is sort of part of the culprit of that. And the way you would identify judgment versus fact is like, what can you see, right? So can you observe and describe something versus a judgment? Anything that has an opinion attached to it would be a judgment. It's good, it's bad, it's right, it's wrong, it's what you should do, you shouldn't do it. Those are all going to be judgments, and figuring out, where those judgments are coming from can help you move forward.
Right. So as you sort through that, what are some of the biggest challenges that you really have? To me, part of what that says is there's a time reflection that is essential to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
But for you, what was the biggest challenge of arriving at that? Because that's a big shift to begin to separate.
So if we're going to stick kind of on the judgment topic, I think judgment is a word we hear a lot. It's kind of a buzzword, no judgment zone. But judgment is something that we need, but it doesn't always serve us. So I think that the challenge of it is starting to create an understanding of what it looks like in your life and then applying it. Because I can sort of work through and start to remove judgment from one area of my life, let's say in my divorce process. But I may still carry judgment around something involving my parenting with my child. So I think that what the hardest challenge, or what I think people struggle with, is this idea like you're never there. It's just a process of unwrapping and opening up as much judgment as possible, because that opens up our options. And whenever we're struggling, we want to change things, or we're looking at, relationships and we feel torn or conflicted, we want to open up as many options as possible. and then to be able to, take a step forward with more information. So the judgment thing is, I think, is not a destination, it's a journey.
Yes.
In all ways. And as you go through any of these processes, you kind of open up that, you start to see so many more areas that it shows up.
So I'm hearing you say judgment is a huge element in terms of being able to look at the issues that you're navigating through. Mm-hmm. What else are some of the big issues or challenges that you might have to address?
I would say some emotional.
Or you should address, not that the judgment.
See, it's not that hard to catch, right? You start to pick up on the words and like all of a sudden you're like, I said a bad word. I think one of the other biggest challenges for people is emotional overwhelm, right? It's like the thought, just thought of not, the conversation, right? So let's say you're not even divorced yet or you're thinking, the thought of that conversation can like send people into major escalation because we're not dealing with just a conversation. It's a conversation that and if you are in the middle of it, it's overwhelming because every part of your life is kind of getting, sorted out and it hits all of the important areas of your life, divorce, your kids, family, where you live, your money, everything. And so that's going to have a lot of emotional overwhelm. And then your kids are going to respond to that. So there's going to be emotional overwhelm from them going through it. And of course, your ex or your spouse is going to have their reactions as well. And that's a very big challenge for people to navigate because not only do you have to deal with your own emotions, but you've got all this other overwhelm kind of bleeding into your space. And so what I do help a lot of people with is navigating those boundaries. How do you allow for that? Because overwhelm is just going to be part of the process, but you still want to be able to move forward with it. And how do you help your kids through their overwhelm? Because how many people stay together for the kids? Because a lot of it, whether it serves them or not, because, they don't want to impact their kids or make things worse. But, how you address your kids is a really, really big deal in this moment, in this transition.
Okay, so we have judgment, overwhelm. What else are big challenges that you deal with?
I would say communication and clarity. So when you're dealing with anyone in a high conflict, and if you're in business, you deal with high conflict people all the time. We're talking bully behaviors, really controlling. So, this can show up anywhere. In this particular environment, I think one of the biggest challenges too is getting very clear on, again, separating like what's opinion, what's fact, and pulling out what actually needs to be dealt with. There's so much coming at you when you're dealing with divorce, when you're dealing with co-parenting. It's like all this information coming at you, and it's all brand new. It's not a process, most people have been through before. And so getting clear on like what you need to put energy towards and what you don't. Especially in high conflict or dealing with a bully or, personality, because you're getting email after email after email after email or text message, and it can be 10, 15 paragraphs of, language that's abusive in nature. And you're reading it because there could be something about your kid in that email. And so how do you kind of dice it up and navigate the emotions that come with somebody who is, saying mean things, right?
So Julie, I want to move to cohabiting or co-parenting a little bit also, but before I do that, I want to just make sure, are there other big challenges that we should talk about before we move into co-parenting?
I think the challenges when it comes to divorce are all around co-parenting. I don't want to say that. I think making the decision and going through it is always going to be challenging, but with divorce, if there's no kids involved, the relationship is over. It's pretty clean in that sense, even though there might be emotional connection. But when you have a child, the reason co-parenting is so such a big topic is because that relationship can never end. It never goes away, right? So you're dealing, and especially if you didn't have that healthy or it wasn't a balanced or productive relationship when you were married, it's rare that it becomes better in the divorce process. And now you have to work, together for the sake of your kids. And that right there is the challenge.
So part of, I'm guessing, what would make it more successful is being able to structure what you would like co-parenting to look like, right? But that requires a certain amount of being able to get past emotion.
Yes. I think, again, it's about separating the emotion and recognizing like which pockets things belong. So I actually have two areas that I focus on with clients. And one is how to write and respond effectively to messages, written messages. Because in co-parenting, and especially high conflict and divorce, not only do you want your documentation, but you don't really want to be, going in back and forth in person as much. So a lot of things are happening in the written page. And what you write and how you respond matters. And a lot of it doesn't. And it's a lot of energy. And so one of the things I work with people is breaking down the steps of how to think through all of those pieces of writing and responding to messages, and how and where to work through the emotional piece, because they're not the same, right? We're not dealing with the emotions with our ex any longer. The other piece that I have that I focus on, which is actually a big chunk of it, is how to teach your kids tools to help them, empower them in a high conflict situation.
Oh,
so
wow.
Right, it's really difficult. You're dealing with someone who you don't really like very much, doesn't really like you. You may not even feel safe or comfortable around them, but now you have to foster and support a relationship with your child to this person. And you're like, but they're scary to me. Like, how's my kid going to defend against this? But yet you have to support that relationship. You can't badmouth your ex. It doesn't help your child to do so. But how do you empower them when you're feeling afraid for them at the same time? And so those are the areas that I do. And there's specific tools and skills that I teach and cover. And the language is all about finding the vocabulary and language to communicate with the people around you.
Wow. So time-wise, a process like that, how long does it take to go through and to learn some of those tools?
It's so funny. I was actually just talking to somebody, and, I work with clients anywhere from 5 weeks to 10 weeks, sometimes longer. But the change session by session is so miraculous. So what I was actually talking to somebody about yesterday is that you have to invest, right? If you're dealing with a difficult relationship and it's taking up your time and energy, whether it's co-parenting, divorce, somebody at work, a family relationship, anywhere, right? It is taking up your time and energy, and in order to make changes, you have to invest some time, because what you're doing is changing the way your brain is thinking about it. And just like the gym, you can go and get a membership, but if you don't actually go and lift those weights, your body does not look different. And this is the same. So it does take some mind training, but the shifts are so doable, and they're not brain surgery. They're really like, oh, that makes so much sense, but you don't necessarily think to do it unless now you're implementing it. So when we're talking about making changes, the amount of change that can happen in one session is incredible. So, people's full relationships with their kids and things are, changing so fast, because what we're doing is getting to the seed of it and making little shifts, redirecting all that energy going to that person back towards your kids and resetting your goals. And then it just kind of opens up and becomes clear. So to answer your question, it's again, it's not a destination, it's a journey, but those changes are noticeably happening along that journey. But yeah.
Children, what do you see happening, the outcome with children when they go through this process? And I'll tell you, here's my judgment, my bias, perhaps, is as I observe people who have gone through divorce, blended families, sometimes multiple blended families, you see sort of a lostness, is that a good word for it? A where do I belong kind of feeling in the children. And I think when I look from the outside in, that's one of the concerns I would have is how do I do this so my children don't end up feeling lost? Am I
That's a really interesting question to say, actually. I think one of the things that's coming to mind as you're saying that is there's a little bit of an assumption, which you actually said, right? So when we make this decision, we bring our fears into it. I'm afraid my kid's going to feel lost. I'm afraid they're going to feel sad, or they're going to feel hurt by something their dad said or mom said. But we don't know that that's going to be their experience. We only know that that's how we have experienced it. And if we bring that energy into, or that assumption into it, it's almost like, can be like a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're looking for information to confirm our beliefs. And you'll always find it if you want to, right? And so I think that part of that judgment and why that's so helpful, and even just from this conversation, you've said you've caught yourself twice. It's that easy. Yeah. You just, all of a sudden you start to notice, like, wait a minute, maybe that's a judgment, is because we don't want to put our experiences onto our children in these situations. We don't want to make assumptions that because we think it's not good for them, that it may actually, it's their life. And it's going to be great. And we're at whatever their life is and whatever our lives turn out, we're going to maximize our existence with whatever space and tools we're given. And that's the message to kids. Not I worry that it's going to be this, but like you had said, this is what we're going to step it into.
So it's really making that conscious choice, isn't it?
Always.
To say,
always,
I'm going to step into it. Avoiding it, hoping it'll get better, doesn't solve it.
Not at all.
At some point, you do have to step in, and when will you do that is maybe part of the question. And
I think it's like anything, right? It's if you spend 5 seconds or an hour just talking about it, it's like, oh, okay. But if you don't, and you don't talk it through and get that clear plan, it's just going to go however it goes. You're going to be winging it. And if you've been winging it and you have some concerns about it, then maybe time to not wing it. Come up with a plan. No one gives birth anymore without having a plan for their hospital and where they're going to go. We used to, but we don't want to wing it anymore. Same thing. This is your family, your life. So just coming up with some plans and thoughts as to how you want to approach things. Because once you start, it's like you do, oh, I can do that here and here and here. Oh, and look, it's here. So it's not as much labor or work as we think.
Well, it is, and it isn't.
It is, and it is, right, like always.
I think one of the things we're not prepared for enough in relationships, and I think we see it in the workplace as well, is we have a assumption. You go through school, you learn how to play together, you play outside, you do those things as you grow and develop, and so we make an assumption relationships happen.
Right.
And as you and I work with people, we realize relationships don't happen. We put things into them that either make them better or not as good. But we're making those conscious or unconscious choices of what we're putting in. And then there's a result that emerges because of that. And I think the same is true with parenting, whether it's in a co-parenting or in a parenting when you're husband and wife, or two adults taking care of a child. You're really looking at how am I going to do this, developing a plan to do it in a thoughtful way instead of letting it just happen.
Yeah.
And I think we let it happen first, then we step back and say, oh, we better have a plan. I don't know.
I think you're right. And I think one of the things and reason I think coaching has been building is because it helps people focus on the parts of life that are so important, but we don't actually look at. Like how do we deal with parenting or co-parenting or divorce? Like not the divorce itself. We get lawyers and everyone kind of knows to do that. But like, what does that actually look like when you're implementing it? Not just what the laws are. And I think so coaching, I think, is one of those things that helps us start to look at those spaces in between life as we're living it, and Yeah.
We need to continue to build connections, don't we? We can't, it's not just severed. You're in a new chapter of connections.
Like, look, you're going through this. This is what's happening. You're either going to go through a divorce, you're going through a divorce. This is your kid's experience. Like, why it's making, sort of empowering yourself through the life that you have. This is where it's going. Maybe you didn't want it. Maybe you want your ex to be different. Maybe you wish your ex was nicer or easier and all that. But if they're not, and that's what it is, okay, then we want to open that lens of judgment, widen it up to find where the openings are to move forward. Because, one of the things that I really help people with is like getting out of that victim mentality that like, this is what your life is and you just have to live it and wait until your kids are 18 and out of the house, and then you don't have to deal with it anymore. But like, I wasn't going to go that road. This is my parenting time, my child's childhood, and I want to embrace that and feel, connected to it. I don't want to be wishing it away or miserable because. So, finding that way of navigating, some pretty rocky terrain without stepping on any landmines, or knowing how to deal with it if I do, so that I can have the life I want regardless of the external circumstances. And that's really what this boils down to. What do you want it to look like, and how do we deal with whatever the road bumps are around that are getting in the way, including an ex,
So, Julie, if I wake up one day and I say, wow, is this really going in the direction I want? What are some big questions I should be asking myself that would help me to know what direction to go in?
You mean like if before you're divorced, figuring out whether you want to get divorced?
Or be divorced, or even I'm thinking you may be divorced and dealing with co-parenting issues, but maybe haven't really thought that through in terms of what that roadmap should look like. What are there big questions that come to you that people should be thinking and asking themselves? It's sort of like a checklist, perhaps, my wellness checklist. Is there such a thing that you should go through in your head?
So there's two pieces, right? So there's the decision-making around the legalities of the relationship. So there's a million checklists out there, and I would absolutely encourage anybody to look at, articles around thinking financially, not emotionally through divorce, and they'll give you all these checklists of how you want to kind of run through, checking your bank account, things like that. And that all deals with sort of the legalities that come with the contract of marriage and what happens when you need to break that contract of marriage. Mm-hmm. But we know a lot of the issues are around the emotions and coming to that. And I think there's no checklist of questions you can ask yourself to say, oh, it's time to leave, because you can say yes to every single one and you're not going to decide because there's another reason. So I think one of the things that comes up a lot is when things are extreme, really great, really bad decisions are easy. But most of life doesn't work that way. Most of the time it's like in that gray. And so one of the things that I work with people on is their relationship to things in the gray. They're tolerating this because if it was great, it wouldn't even be a question, right? So if you're what else do you tolerate, right? How does this show up? Because settling is something that can be a judgment that you have around your life or a limitation, and you're showing up. And like, what do you really want? And how is what you have fitting into that? And just to really connect, because a lot of times what holds people back is the fear of what's going to be instead. What if I do this and it's not worth it? What if I do this and I made a mistake, right? And all these things. And those are very trapping questions, right? Because you don't know. You can't know. And you can't know if you didn't make this decision and stayed that it would be better 5 years down the road. Nobody knows that. And so those kinds of questions create these logic loops in our brain that just keep us standing in the same spot. And so we want to break those questions and start asking questions that actually create some movement. And that would be different for everybody. That would be based on what shows up, where they're at, what's holding them back. Is it really external financial things, or what are the blocks there?
Right.
So, yeah.
Julie, it is hard to believe, but we've been talking for 30 minutes, and it has gone so quickly. Before we conclude, though, you have some marvelous resources available that people may want to have access to. So those of you who are listening to this podcast, if you would like us to get you information about Julie, we'd be glad to do that. Julie, if you can just make sure that we have some resources for people, that would be great.
Yeah,
and we will make whatever connections we can make for you, or at least send you to Julie so you can have questions answered by her. And I just, again, as we first began, I think what we do with our relationships is so important. It is one of the things that in life, I think many, when they come towards the end of life, it's the relationships they look back on to determine how successful they really were as leaders, as executives, as people. And so being able to really address this in a thoughtful way before we maybe don't have the opportunity is so important. So Julie, I just thank you for taking the time and sharing with us your experience and your knowledge. And I look forward to other conversations with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, I hope it was helpful. If anyone's going through it, anything, I hope it was connected. So
thanks very, very much.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.